Hello and welcome back to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and today I am very excited to share a special episode to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States of America. On today's episode, Father Shenan Boquet and I discuss Catholic influence on American history. From the Carroll family who was involved in the founding of America, down to people like Fulton Sheen, Father and I discuss different Catholic individuals and religious orders and the role that they played in helping shape American culture and American history. We also talk about how the lives of these individuals can be an inspiration for us today. Obviously, we touch on some of the more well-known Catholic Americans, such as St. Katharine Drexel and St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, but I also share some stories from lesser-known individuals, such as Fanny Allen and Sister Blandina and Servant of God Joseph Dutton. One thing that really struck me as I was preparing for and filming this episode is just the great missionary spirit of America, which was so inspirational to me working here at HLI, and I hope that it's inspirational to you as well. If there are any Catholic Americans that we didn't have time to touch on, or maybe don't know about, please leave who they are in the comment section. I absolutely loved reading the stories of different Catholic Americans as I was preparing for this episode, and I would love to continue learning more. As always, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share the episode with someone who you think would enjoy it this wonderful anniversary weekend. Without further ado, I hope that you have a wonderful 4th of July, and please welcome Father Boquet to Living a Culture of Life. Welcome to the podcast, Father.
Well, Colleen, good to be back in the studio with you once again. It's been a little while.
It has, and I am so excited for this episode today. As any of my friends can tell you, I love the 4th of July celebration, and so I'm very excited for America's 250th anniversary. So I'm super excited for our American-themed episode today.
Awesome.
So, yeah, well, thank you. Today, I wanted to talk about the Catholic influence on America. So over the past 250 years of the United States of America, and obviously many years before that as America was settled and discovered, we have a lot of Catholics who are influential. And obviously America was founded mostly by Protestants, but there were some very key Catholic figures who were either close with some of the founding fathers and who have then gone on to influence America since then. So I'm just excited to talk about some of them today, especially I have a list of some of the lesser known people, which I thought was exciting. As I was doing research, trying to prepare for this, I was like, okay, there's the obvious ones, and then I want to try to find a few lesser known ones as well. So hopefully, if our audience hasn't heard about them, hopefully they enjoy their stories. So
that's great. I mean,
yeah.
It's a wonderful topic, because it just shows the influence that an individual can make, and also that the church herself on mission is meant to make. Yeah. So I look forward to talking about this a little bit and kind of sharing some of the ones, the personalities I brought.
Yes.
Some of them are saints. Well, most of them will be, but it's good to have that balance, because as you just said, I mean, not every person who's been of influence was declared a saint by Holy Mother the Church. But there have been a lot of saintly souls and a lot of virtuous men and women throughout our history, in our little short history in the United States, that have been very influential in shaping our land. So we're very, very grateful. So it's great to talk about that.
Yes, it is. And also just fun history tidbit for our audience. The day that this is releasing, July 2nd, was actually the day that the founding fathers voted for independence. So this was the day that John Adams thought that we would celebrate. So once I saw that what day this episode was releasing, I was like, we have to do it. It's the actual official 250th anniversary. So could we just start by talking briefly about the virtue of patriotism and what that means? Because I think that's a really helpful thing to have going into this conversation of what position are we as Catholics, what is the virtuous attitude to have towards your country?
Right. So what we were talking about right before we began the podcast, and we mentioned St. Thomas Aquinas, and looking at how he looked at the word in the sense of a form of piety. Mm-hmm. And we can just kind of start with that, because the beautiful thing with the approach to this is, how can I, as a disciple of the Lord, mm-hmm. how do I, in response to the call to holiness, the call to a life of virtue, a call to a life of Christ, how does that really shape my day, my life itself, whether I be married, whether I be single, whether I be in a position of authority, whether I be a laborer out in the farming field, whether I be in the house of government, wherever I am, is how does this understanding of my life in Christ give shape? And so here in the United States is, how do I take those admirable virtues, that this nation stands for, mm-hmm. and how do I help advance those virtues? How do I help promote them in daily life? And not only here in our own lands, but how do we promote that in our approach to international relationships? So it really is, and that's some of the personalities we're going to talk about, really did just that, in a sense of bringing with them their skills, their talents, their trades, the way that their devotional life. I mean, so much of the immigrants have come to our nation, brought with them the great heritage and cultures of their own nations with regard to devotion and piety and practice of faith, and this is something that shaped our land. And so it's important for us today, especially as we ask ourselves, okay, it's not just looking back. We're not here for nostalgic purposes alone. Yes, we're going to remember, but we're also here to say, what happens going forward? How do I, as a citizen, and the bishops of the United States in their document, Faithful Citizenship, really speak of this and address, how do I, as a Catholic living in the United States, how do I bear witness to the gospel in the daily life that I have in this country? And it's worth reading. If our audience is not familiar with it, it is worth reading and reflecting on. Yeah. The bishops have done a very good job. And like anything else, there's always, it's not exhaustive. There's always more conversation that can be had in this regard. But it's a good understanding of how the shepherds of the local church are looking at us as a country and as Catholics in this nation that are the dominant, in a sense, Christian religion in the United States. Yeah. How do we influence our world around us? And how do we shape our country, through the vision that we have that begins with human dignity? And how do we respond to that?
Yes. And one thing that also struck me as I was kind of just doing some research into different Catholic influences on America is just how many were missionaries. And just working here, having our pro-life missionaries around the world, it was just interesting to reflect on what missionary work looks like today and what it looked like back then. And there was one in particular, I was listening to a podcast about her on the way in, Sister Blandina Segale. And I always knew about her from her work in like the Wild West and with the outlaws and the fastest nun in the West. And I was listening to a podcast about her talking about her work in, I believe, Cincinnati after she came back from the West. And one thing that she did a lot was ministering to Italian immigrants who had grown up culturally Catholic, but were not well catechized and were therefore losing their faith. Because a lot of different Protestant churches had social services that they would then go to, and then they would end up losing the Catholic faith and becoming Protestant. And it was just interesting listening to it, being like, oh, she's such a good model for today, where we have so many Catholics who have had years of bad catechesis or lack of catechesis, who don't know about what the church teaches on different issues and are at risk of losing their faith or have lost their faith. And just what can we learn from her about how to be able to bring people back to the faith and be able to catechize those in our own communities. This isn't a new issue. This has been going on for a long time.
Exactly.
So that's just an example of how we can learn from these different figures.
And I think, especially in today's experience in the United States, with so many now being raised in a culture that doesn't have the joy of seeing religious communities as much as we once did 100 years ago. We've seen a cultural change, sadly, happen in the United States. But we have to realize that from the very beginning, when the nation was founded, meaning, and before it was, I should say, discovered, before founded as the United States of America, the Republic, was the understanding that when you had these people coming to new land for different reasons, for political reasons, for monetary reasons, but there, as the nation began to bring in various peoples, the missionaries came. And as a result, we would see the first Mass prayed, upon this land. We would see with them nurses, teachers, people with different skills, in the various disciplines of daily life, coming from different lands, coming from Europe. And as a result, what we take for granted today, hospital care, we take for granted today, education, our educational system, a lot of this originates with the missionaries, the Catholic missionaries. When you think of, for example, I'm thinking of St. Katharine Drexel, I'm thinking of Mother Cabrini, I'm thinking of the Ursuline sisters, the Carmelite sisters. I mean, so much today, it seems to be more of a history note, but in reality, their lives are still shaping us today, maybe not as influential as we would want, but their memory and the legacy that they created. And I think that's important, that we're building on a legacy. We're building on what others did. And I believe in respect to that is, how do we carry that forward? And maybe how do we rekindle maybe what's been lost. When we think about Catholic healthcare, we think about, so much that we owe to the religious sisters and the religious men of the day who founded the hospitals that today are still bear their names, still bear the communities. Or you think of Juniper Sierra, the great missionary of the West Coast. You think about that influence, and still today, several of those cities still bear the name he gave them.
Yes.
Right? The city may not be living in the light of those names, but they're there. So there's so much to celebrate. So I look forward to talking a little bit more about them. But I think it's important for us is, again, not looking just back, but looking at what did we inherit. And I often think of Ronald Reagan himself, talked about a city set on a hill, kind of making great reference, to the this. And when I often pray with that and think about that and come across, and I've used his words with this, is I do believe, and of course I'm a little biased, I'm from the United States, born and raised here, a citizen of this great land. I do believe that our nation, and having been to now very close to 100 countries, I see the great joy of our country when it celebrates goodness and truth and its generosity and its care. We are indeed a nation that shines, and there's much that we're disappointed in. We've talked about that on many podcasts. We're not going to go down that road today, but there's potential still, and there's something for us to celebrate and something for us to bring out into our nation, but also to bring out into our world, and that's what again is important. For us to really be thinking about.
Well, and it's also important just in developing that virtue of patriotism to be able to recognize the evils that America has brought to different points of the world, but then also to recognize the good. And then what can we learn from the good? How do we make that good shine brighter? And how do we fight against the evil? And I just think it's really important to not always have the Debbie Downer view of America, but to really celebrate the good things, the good history that America has.
Exactly. Let your light shine before others.
Especially just, again, with the natural, this is the land that we were born into, the land that raised us. And there's something good, like, your parent could be sinful. It could be a sinful person, but you still love them because they're your parent, and having a similar attitude towards the country that you're from. So how do you want to begin going through some of the influential Catholic figures? I have mine organized more or less in a chronological order, but you might have them organized differently. So
what I do before I kind of jump into a few names, and I'm going to let you begin the first one because you're excited. I can see it, and you're ready to talk about them. But just to kind of look at how the framework. So what I did is I wrote down, how did the religious, how did the priest, how did the bishops and the lay faithful give shape? And so I kind of put it down into a couple of subtopics, if you will.
Yeah.
So, how did the first missions bring a Catholic presence, which is what we started talking about. So those first missionaries, and I love how you connected to HLI, because indeed the same approach is how we still function today as a missionary, as a mission going out to bring the gospel of life. We respect the local culture, we respect, the approaches, and then we try to bring light into those moments and truth to those moments, to the principles as Catholics that we believe. And we have to do that patiently, sometimes with a firm resolve, always. But the idea is that how do we navigate those waters that are maybe unsettled, like the great missionaries of old? When you think of Isaac Jogues and his companions, when you think of so many, then we don't think of the martyrs, or you think of St. Kateri, Takawitha, herself, who, struggled within her own cultural upbringing, her own tribal upbringing, but to see how she came to the faith and what was the cost for that, right? And so, or you think of, St. Mariana Cope. Now, I'll tell you, I wasn't going to mention names, but I already am, because it fits in. Because when you think of St. Mariana Cope, we hear the story about her going with the sisters to Hawaii, to the island of Malawi, not Malawi, Molokai, excuse me, where the leper colony,
and so Damien
bringing
also
health care. But yet they're already in New York, already in many other parts. So with healthcare, the great missionaries. The other thing was, how did the Catholics, looking at the great American experiment, right? How did they look at liberty? How did they see justice? How did they see the pursuit of happiness? What does that mean to a Catholic?
Yeah.
All right. We value these great goods as well. So how did the Catholics who came to this nation see, especially as the nation became a nation, and it began to advocate both in its constitution, in its Bill of Rights, in its legal system, and in the various way the states were created? How did liberty play into this?
Yeah.
How did freedom of conscience play into this? Right? Still the battleground today. But this all began with those early missionaries. Remember, the Catholics weren't necessarily well received in those early days, right? So also today, the issue of immigration. This land, we are people who came, my family, French, came to this nation, right? When it wasn't a nation, right? So we have to look at how do the immigrants and how do the people coming still today, help shape, how do those Catholics coming abroad, the Polish, the Italian, the Irish, you think about so many, education, already talked a little bit about, and then I put down here the formation of conscience. I believe Catholics have played and continue to play a very key role in the conscience of this nation. Principles are very important. We talked about social services. You mentioned it. You think about the Catholic charities. You think about how this nation, through its Catholic population, is so generous. Still today, are people who work in the House of Congress, right, through the Senate or the representatives. What about those who held, some of the highest legal seats in the nation? Chief justices, in different states, or on the Supreme Court. Right. So we think about just all these things that today we just kind of walk around passing by them, but, in the institutions, but it's because of our brothers and sisters who came first as missionaries and joined this great vision of a nation and contributed by being veterans of great wars. They've shed their blood for this nation, still shed their blood for this nation. All right. So there's so much that shapes. So I just threw a couple of names out. We'll come back to them because I can see all that excitement, which I want you to do because it's important. I think this is a beautiful way to remember.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned I had on my list Isaac Jogues and St. Kateri Tekakwitha and Father Junipero Serra as well. So maybe you could speak a little bit more about them because I have brief details about each life, but it's maybe something about them that strikes you or things that we can learn from them today.
Well, if I could, I want to kind of go to the first bishop of the United States,
yes, John Carroll.
John Carroll.
Yes.
So also think about his brother, was a signer of the Constitution.
Yes, so, Daniel Carroll.
So when you think about not a brother, it was a cousin, excuse me.
No, it was Daniel was his brother. So Charles Carroll of Carrollton, who signed the Declaration of Independence, was his cousin.
Okay.
And he was the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence. And then John Carroll and Daniel Carroll were brothers.
Right.
Daniel Carroll was actually one of the only people to sign, or one of a small handful of people who signed both the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, which was cool. And then there was another Catholic signer, Thomas Fitzsimmons, who often gets lost because everyone knows about the Carrolls. But
Correct.
There was two Catholic signers of the Constitution. So,
but when you look at the first bishop, and then you look at again what we just said, from the brothers, the cousins, these are all people that were very influential, in the shaping of the early days of the nation, and so some from the governance side, but then you had the religious side, and you realize from John Carroll, not only the founding of the first diocese, but with that came institutions, parishes, schools, eventually, and began to grow. So that first seed is where we think today of right now. I need to verify the number, but my memory is correct. It's 193 Catholic ordinaries in the United States. So dioceses. Okay. There are eparchies with that, and so forth. But the idea that you think of where we are today, and where the population was then of Catholics, and where we are now, over 70 million in the United States. That's a huge growth.
Yeah. So would everything in America before John Carroll was appointed bishop have been missionary territory, or would it have fallen under the bishops in England?
So it would have been considered mission territories, from and overseen by, the superiors and the superior generals and the bishops abroad. But eventually, as the nation began to see the settlements begin to grow, the church does what she always does. As populations grow, they need shepherds, they need local priests, they need missionaries, they need religious, and so the church provides, and so we see the growth.
I can't imagine how overwhelming that must have been to be appointed the first bishop of America right after its founding. I believe he was friends with, or acquaintances with Benjamin Franklin, because I think it was John Carroll, Daniel Carroll, and Benjamin Franklin all went on a trip to Montreal to try to get the French, like there was some negotiations going on that were unsuccessful, but I believe that Benjamin Franklin had a role in getting John Carroll appointed bishop. I was reading briefly about this yesterday, and I don't remember a lot of the details because I was reading a lot.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to celebrate.
There was,
and so, but then you start thinking, of the various religious sisters that because of Bishop Carroll, he knew that he's one person, even with the local priests that he had and some of the religious, he needed to bring others in. So you would start seeing the invitation to communities in Europe. Please come to the United States. It's new mission territory, and you begin to start see where they will give them plots of land, where they can become, where they can build institutions, build their mother houses, and learning centers, which become schools and so forth. Hospitals, the great need, and so the church has a great wisdom. This is something I think we also forget about the church herself from her very early beginnings, that she shaped not only the religious sphere. She shaped the temporal sphere. Yeah. And in many ways, especially, how her wisdom comes in and builds structure through her institutions and brings order into a community and a contribution to the common good.
Yes. Well, that's a good segue into a couple people I wanted to bring up. So one of the articles that I read as I was preparing for this was from the USCCB. And it was a great article talking about how oftentimes we can talk about the saints that shaped American history, and that's a good thing. But they were also shining light on the lay people who weren't necessarily saintly figures, or you're not going to hold them up as like the model of holiness, but they were faithful Catholics who were influential in the formation of America. So there was Colonel John Fitzgerald and Commodore John Barry, and I'll link some of in the description just for more resources on these people so people can read about them more. But Commodore John Barry is called one of the fathers of the American Navy. And then Colonel John Fitzgerald was one of Washington's aides de camp. And so he was with Washington throughout Valley Forge and eventually was wounded at the Battle of Monmouth. And he remained good friends with Washington, and he founded the Basilica of St. Mary's in Alexandria, Virginia. And legend has it that Washington made the first donation to this church, which is also really cool. It's interesting. I was at Mount Vernon last year, and you walk into the receiving room where Washington would have received people, and there's a picture of Our Lady on the wall. And my husband and I both were kind of like, was that normal for a Protestant back then? Because we don't think so. So obviously there's all the rumors that Washington converted on his deathbed, and I don't necessarily think that that's true, but it does seem that he had a great respect for fellow Catholics in his dealings with, probably because of the influence of people like Colonel John Fitzgerald. So, and I know at one point Washington rebuked anti-Catholic sentiment because he wanted to keep the French on our side. So it's just interesting to think about people like Washington and how he would have been influenced, informed, and had conversations with the people around him who share our faith.
And just as a note, now let you continue, please. But it still happens today. I mean, what we don't always see in the headlines is the very fact of dignitaries and governance calling leaders within the faith community. Yeah. A lot of times the Catholic bishops themselves are their delegates are consulted, asked for input. And we still see that still today, where we see the President of the United States, President Trump, asking for guidance from some of the bishops and having them sit on some committees, on religious liberty and to help, guide and bring a wisdom and understanding to the conversation. This is very important, and I'm not going to drop any names, but I mean, I do know personally, through my years, I know bishops who have been very helpful in shaping local governance within the state. With the local governor calling and asking about moral questions, about guidance, and none of this you'll see in the public sphere, but it's conversations that are being had and behind doors or on phones or letters of correspondence. So the church still is very much like those days of George Washington.
And it really goes to show the importance of Catholics being in those positions and both being informed about their faith and then also being competent in their jobs and getting into those positions, because those personal conversations, those people turning in moments of private for counsel in a certain decision, that those can have the most influence. Exactly. Like petitioning and all of that is great, but like anything that you can do, raising awareness about things is all good. But it's really those personal conversations with people who are very knowledgeable about what the church teaches that I think have some of the greatest.
And even some of the people serving currently, whether on state legislature or on the federal level, the reason why a good many of them enter in is because they want to see the common good. Yeah. They want to see it fulfilled. They want to see it realized. and they want to be part of that. And they know that they're fighting, kind of upstream. But I mean, again, we have so many to be thankful for the way in which we see much of our law today was shaped by their desire to fight the good fight. And we still need that today, and we have it today.
Well, to that end, so I was at the America is Back rally a couple nights ago, and Secretary Duffy got up and was speaking, and he had his whole family up on stage with him. And one thing he was talking about was just the importance of getting married and having a family and all of that. But he was talking about how he and his wife, he's like, we're Catholic and we're open to life. And I was just standing there thinking about how controversial contraception can be, and how like HLI has faced, people saying like, why do you talk about contraception, and how it's related to abortion throughout the years. And I was like, this is one of the secretaries of the United States standing up in front of a whole crowd of people from all different backgrounds and all different like religions. I bet a lot of people here either use contraception or think it's okay. And he's talking about openness to life and the importance of that. And anyway, it was just something that struck me.
It's refreshing.
It is. It was very refreshing. And obviously his daughter has Down syndrome as well. So it was just like, you are such a great model of like what a Catholic family can look like, and also and be in those positions. And I'm just very thankful that I had that. It was just it just struck me because it was something I wasn't expecting to hear at the rally, was openness to life. So.
Right. And we think about, you think of Justice Scalia, you think of so many, that have been really influential on very levels of strong influence in writing. And really all built upon those Catholic principles, and that's so important today still, and that's part of what we say going forward for the next 250 years, just going forward. So, but I know you have a couple of more names too.
Oh no, that was like really like talking about the founding. Those are mostly my people, was like talking about the Catholics who were close to Washington, and then obviously the Carrolls and the Catholics influential in the actual formation of the founding documents of America.
Right.
So
I brought a couple of extra little names just to kind of help toss into the pot.
Yes.
And I already mentioned a few of them, but when you think of St. John Neumann, and St. John Neumann and the Bishop of Philadelphia, and so you think about when you go back and you read his history and you read the church in Philadelphia's growth, what happened in that period when he became the local shepherd, and how Catholic education began to grow. And, and the number of parishes began to grow. And why? Because families were strong. Families were strong in number. Family life was valuable. The contribution of the family to the society was irreplaceable, still irreplaceable. But you saw this, and as a result, the need to shepherd them, the need to provide good formation, catechesis. But with all that they're also founding good citizens. This goes back to the current document, faithful citizenship. How do I, as a Catholic living in the United States, in this republic, how do I contribute to the common good? How do I bear witness to the gospel, to my faith, to the faith tradition as a Catholic, in a culture that may not necessarily always want to hear that voice, but nonetheless that voice will be spoken? How do we navigate those waters? We got St. Katharine Drexel, the founder of the Sister of the Blessed Sacrament. She devoted all of her own fortune to caring for the African American and for the local indigenous peoples. And we see again, Catholic education, Catholic missionaries going out.
And I believe that she gave up she was from a wealthy family in Philadelphia. So I believe she gave up quite a bit to be able to go serve in that capacity.
Did. And I can tell you New Orleans, where I'm from south of New Orleans in the Houma area, but Mother Drexel was very much a part of the Mother Cabrini, another example.
Oh, yeah.
So you think of all of them contributing, through their foundations and through their various, or actually in presence, building like Xavier University. So there's so much that we need to be thinking about.
Well, and to that end, also, obviously, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton being and both, it was interesting. Right. I don't know. I did Seton home study for some of my homeschooling growing up. So I definitely knew about her. But one thing I didn't really make the connection with is that before her husband died, she and they were kind of rubbing elbows with the Hamiltons in New York City. I believe they were neighbors, and she and Eliza Hamilton were involved in similar charitable things as well. So it was just interesting to think about. And I think in one of the articles I read about her yesterday, it was, I think it was John Jay saved her father's life, I believe, but I'm not 100% positive about that. I'll link the article in the description. But just thinking about the fact that she would have, again, obviously this I think was before she converted, but she would have been rubbing elbows with those people. And then she obviously went on to become a sister and be so influential in that sphere as well.
Exactly.
Who do you think are some of the figures that are most influential in Catholic education in America? If you were to kind of name, you have dropped a few names, are there any particular people that really helped with the formation and the structure of Catholic education
Yeah,
that people can look to and learn
so
more
we've
about?
already mentioned them. I mean, obviously Elizabeth Ann Seton, played a fundamental role. I mentioned, St. John Neumann, and obviously John Carroll from the very beginning, So, but you look at the different religious communities. I mean, in New Orleans, for example, the Ursuline sisters,
Okay.
who came in, into various communities in our nation in its early days and founded educational centers.
And that would be they would have been French, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about the Ursuline
So
sisters, if I'm honest.
and there's a wonderful, school is still open in New Orleans. The Ursuline Academy is still there. Sadly, the sisters are passed, but their influence is still there. I mean, you just travel off the Interstate I-10 going through New Orleans, and Xavier University is right off the right-hand side if you're going toward the city. I mean, that area, again, is so influenced by this great university, but there's so many other schools in New Orleans, just like Baltimore, like New York, many of the East Coast. New Orleans has got a similarity to it because those early religious communities that came with the French, came with the Spanish, eventually came with the new settlers of the new nation after the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, all this stuff began to build. And so when I'm on the East Coast in Boston area, when I'm in New York itself or in Philadelphia, and I see the history, it's so similar to New Orleans' history, because you will see the various religious communities, the Blessed Sacrament sisters, the Ursulines, you'll see the Carmel sisters, you'll see the Dominicans, that are there. All this has been shaped, the Jesuits, all this shaped because people came as missionaries. They came to a land and by invitation, by majority, but that invitation began to build. And then it's as the country got, we forget, how this little nation began, and what the Louisiana Purchase did in 1803, I mean, how much territory that added, to this nation. And eventually once the state of Texas, the Republic of Texas, broke away from, the Mexico and then began to have an independent nation and joined the nation and so forth and so on. I mean, it's amazing to see the spirit of the nation grow. But with that, every place it grew, the Catholic Church grew with it.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting, going a little bit back to the founding too, of the stories of the different Catholics, like lesser known ones. So one of my absolute favorite stories that, as I was preparing for this, I totally forgot about her. And then I remembered her and I was like, I need to share this story because I love it, is the story of Fanny Allen. So a lot of our listeners have probably heard about Ethan Allen, who was obviously the leader of the Green Mountain Boys, took Fort Ticonderoga, and is just very well known in the Northeast. Obviously, growing up in New England, you just hear about Ethan Allen and the Allens everywhere. And he was a deist and very rational, definitely aligned with the kind of anti-Catholic thoughts of the time, from my understanding. And his daughter was raised that way. He died when she was 4 years old. Fanny Allen grew up in Vermont at this time of the founding of the country, and she had definitely absorbed the kind of not religious, anti-ish religious mentality. And she says such a cool story. So when she was 12 years old, I'm going to read just from her words because she can tell the story better than I can. When I was 12 years old, I was walking one day on the banks of the river, which flowed not very far from our house. The water, although very clear, rolled by in torrents. Suddenly I beheld emerging from the river an animal more resembling a monster than a fish, for it was of extraordinary size and horrid shape. It was coming directly towards me, and sent a chill of terror through me. What aggravated my peril was that I could not turn away from this monster. I seemed paralyzed and rooted to the ground. While I was in this torturing situation, I saw advancing toward me a man with a venerable and striking countenance, wearing a brown cloak and carrying a staff in his hand. He took hold of my arm gently and gave me strength to move, while he said most kindly to me, "My child, what are you doing here? Hasten away." I then ran as fast as I could. When I was some distance off, I turned to look at this venerable man, but I could see him nowhere. So she goes home, tells her mom about this. The mom goes to try to find the man, can't find him. So the years go by, and Fanny decides that she is going to go study with the nuns in Montreal. And I've heard different things. Some was that she wanted to learn how to study French. Other people seem to think that there was an intellectual curiosity. Her mother makes her get baptized in the Episcopal Church before she goes, and she laughs the entire way through the baptism. Like, this is ridiculous. Right. Laughing all the way through. So she goes to live at this boarding school with these nuns in Montreal, and one day a sister comes to her and says, like, can you bring these flowers to the altar and acknowledge the true presence? And she's like, I'm not going to do something I don't believe in. Like, I don't think the true presence is there. And so she walks into the church, And all of a sudden she's frozen and she can't move. She's just like stuck. And then after a little bit of this, she realizes like this is the true presence, and she fell to her knees in adoration and experienced this conversion. And she apparently kind of kept that hidden a little bit, kind of figured out where she was, finally decided that she wanted to become Catholic, was rebaptized because there was people were questioning whether or not her baptism originally was legitimate, because she laughed all the way through it and clearly didn't believe it. And so she goes home and her family is horrified. They're like, no, not only are you Catholic, but like you want to become a nun, because she had decided that she probably had a religious vocation. And so they're like trying to get her to become a high Episcopal, saying maybe and they make her wait at least a year. They're like, wait a year before you go back to Montreal to become a nun. And in that time, I don't remember where I read it, but I think I read somewhere that they were like trying to set her up with different people and show her what she'd be missing out if she became a nun in Montreal. And Fanny's like, nope, I'm going back. I'm going to go become a nun. And so she goes back to Montreal and is trying to decide which order she wants to enter. And she entered, and she didn't want to go necessarily with the one where she had gone to boarding school. She was kind of looking into the different religious houses and deciding which order she felt called to. And she walked into this one church and there was a painting of the Holy Family. And she looked at it and she's like, and it was I think the Order of St. Joseph. Let me see if I have it here. She became a religious hospitaller of St. Joseph. So I believe that would have been the church it was in. But I'm not positive on that. And so she looks at this painting and she's like, that's the man that saved me from the river when I was 12. And it was St. Joseph.
St. Joseph.
And so anyway, she ended up entering into that order, and I believe that they were nurses, because the hospital in Vermont is named Fanny Allen. And so she stayed in Montreal. She wasn't necessarily in Vermont for the rest of her life, but it was just really cool that the daughter of this Revolutionary War hero, who very much was not Catholic, had such a profound conversion story and became, I believe, the first woman in New England to enter into the Catholic religious life. So anyway, she's one of my favorites, and no one's ever heard of her, and I'd never heard of her, and I grew up there. So I love sharing her story.
No, I think it's beautiful, and you can see the joy, and it's such a wonderful thing for us to celebrate. And I believe that, as Catholics, there was that wonderful, beautiful ministry called Catholics Come Home, and it's such a beautiful ministry. It reminds Catholics what to celebrate, why we as Catholics should be proud of our heritage in this nation, and what we have contributed, what we have given in sacrifice and blood and in support of, and where we're going to move forward. And it's wonderful when you hear, like in Montreal, you mentioned Montreal, of course we think of the Americas, and we have our beautiful image of Our Lady of Guadalupe here, and she is the mother and the patroness of the Americas, given to us by great St. John Paul II, who entrusted the Americas to her. And so, like, when you think about Montreal, you think of Our Lady of Quebec, you think of the Notre Dame sisters in Montreal itself, great teachers. Much of the places throughout our country, owe to the Notre Dame sisters coming down into the lower parts of America to help in education. So this is a heritage that we should be taking time to read. And all we've done today is the tip of our pinky is mention a few names. We've dropped some names, all right? And you shared some unknowns, probably to most of our audience. And sometimes maybe even our listeners have forgotten the legacy of those whose names are on placards on churches and halls of honor in libraries, who are hospitals named after them, and wonder, who is that? Why is that name there? This is something we should pause. And I believe that, to me, is what our anniversary should do. Because every anniversary, I just celebrated my 33rd anniversary as a priest on June 12th.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And starting a 34th year, and so it's not only a time to celebrate the day, but to celebrate where I've come from, to remember, and remember those who contributed. So on that day, I was very, very reflective, of people in my life who have passed, but who shaped that. To me, the 250th anniversary of our nation is a chance to do just that too. To not only celebrate the patriots, the great people who contributed to the foundation of the great republic, but also for us, looking what vision are we going to carry forward? So how does these great values that we hold are going to be advocated for now and moving forward? But as Catholics, we have work to do. As we've talked, and I'm not going to go down in a sense in the darkness, because as you said, we don't need to look at the wounds right now, but we can't ignore them either.
No.
The very fact that we have many states that have strong Catholic populations where, abortion is legal, where euthanasia is legal or being legalized, right? We have many parts of our nation that need light, that need the salt of the gospel, that need witnesses to the gospel. We need our Catholics to shine brightly in this world and to fight the good fight. And we have many doing that, but we need so much more. And we need our Catholic community to be willing to sacrifice like those of old. I mean, when you think of Isaac Jogues and always laugh about the word companion a little bit, please forgive me for digressing for a second. One of the good priest friends of mine who served HLI for several years, a great pro-life advocate, Father Peter West, when we would talk about fundraising for HLI, he would say, we just need to get you shot. And he says, and in a sense, but he says, knowing my luck, it'll be you that gets martyred, and I'll be known as companion. And he says, so sometimes we forget who the companions are. We need to know who they are. But the idea is that you think about their sacrifice, the great North American martyrs, and you think about that. And you think about, there are many people that never got their name on a plaque, but who made those same sacrifices, the unknowns, that really shaped the communities. I mean, the local religious, the local priests, the local laity, those local people who daily lived out the gospel. That little lady down the street, who was always charitable and kind, that kind man who always was willing to help someone in need. These are the people that shape a community. And it's interesting to hear, Secretary Duffy talk about the family, to hear, President Trump talking about this, and many others. Why? Because something has been lost. Not just a memory, but a framework. The foundation of every society is the family. And we keep undermining the family, eroding the family, breaking down the very cell upon which everything is built. And so if we want to build and grow, it begins in the family. It begins by supporting the family, encouraging marriage, stability of marriage, promoting family life. As Secretary Duffy said, be open to the gift of life. It's a noble quest. It's a noble journey. It's a great, in a sense of a kind of a crusade. In a sense, you're on the unknowns, but that's what, here is where rugged, individualism here can be something good. If it's seen in totality, that I have something to give and I want to be part of something bigger than myself. And that's marriage, that's family life for those that are called to this. And to see how does that shape our nation? Because our nation is not a nation that, in a sense of that because of its money, some believe that, some believe because of its power. We believe it's because of its people. We believe because of the people. People make up this nation. And the real treasure of this nation are its people. And if we recognize some of these treasures that we've been talking about, they're still here today. We have treasures today. Many wonderful people doing this today still, building on those great legacies. So
no, that was one reason I wanted to bring up some of the lesser known names as well, just because it kind of gives people a tantalizing taste of people to look into, but also just these great models of people who served their communities, who lived these sometimes very holy lives, sometimes still just influential locally lives. And I mean, that's not to discredit, Mother Cabrini or Katharine Drexel or any of the other great names. Like, they obviously should be upheld too and be looked into, but it's just kind of showing there's such a treasure trove of influential Catholic Americans. And it's very encouraging. You can kind of look for the one that resonates the most with you and, read more about them. Learn what you can from their life.
That's right. And it's kind of what you did, today by wanting to have this podcast. You wanted to highlight, you wanted to celebrate, a memory, a legacy, but also what does that legacy teach me still? And and I think, I have a love of and a devotion in a way, of the way that little did I know how the Lord would call me to this particular ministry to the degree that he's called me to. St. Damien, you mentioned earlier, Marianne Cope. To me, and I think of their lives, and I think of what they really sacrifice
Yeah.
to serve, which is HLI, life.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about both of them for our audience? Because I'd never heard of Marianne before I was looking into things yesterday.
Right.
I've heard of St. Damien, and I actually have a third one to add to that mix, which is servant of God Joseph Dutton, who was from Vermont, and he went to go serve in Hawaii with them as well.
Right. So why don't you share a little bit about him?
Oh, that's basically, he was born in Stowe.
Right.
I believe he was in the Midwest for a while. I think he served in the Civil War. But I'm not positive about that. Ended up drinking, kind of didn't have a great lifestyle, and then realized he needed to convert, and gave the rest of his life. He showed up at Hawaii and saw Father Damien, and he's like, I'm here to work. Right. And so for the next 40 something years, he just served with them. So Father Damien and Marianne Cope are, I think, the more well-known ones, and they kind of spearheaded this program.
And Dunn is actually, his cause is opened.
Yes, he's servant of God right now.
Exactly. So it's a beautiful way to remember, and what you just said, I think it's a great story, kind of that rugged individualism there, where someone just kind of thinks they can do all these things, and comes to find out how broken and wounded and how needy, and all of a sudden sees a life before them they never would have considered. And yet that ruggedness, that hard work, that personality so needed, came to life in a different way.
Apparently in the military, it was like you can trust him with any job that
he could do it. And
then when he showed up in Hawaii, it was like the same thing. He took any role that needed to be done, he would take it on. And so
when you think about, how he assisted, so you think about Father Damien and you think about Sister Marianne Cope, now both saints, these are two individuals who were invited by the local bishop who had a need of local people who had been dealing with the disease of leprosy, which and so as a result, they were isolated on the island of Molokai, and it was basically an island where no one would return from, and so no one really wanted to go to minister. It was very difficult, for the local bishop to get someone to be willing to volunteer to go to the island, because they knew that the probability was you yourself would never return from the island. Yeah. And so St. Damien received that call and welcomed it and gave his life to it. And he himself would spend himself out of love, for the local people there. And he himself saw that this was a divine mission for him that God gave to him, and he would die among them. Sister Marianne Cope, as I mentioned a little earlier, was invited by the bishop to come and also assist as nurses and health providers. But again, the bishop got zero response from so many communities, because one, not because of a negative, but because they were already so engaged, so spread. But no doubt, it probably played a heavy hand to know that this disease at the time was very contagious, and the probability was the sisters would never leave the island. Yeah. And so, but interestingly, Sister Marianne Cope and the sisters never contracted the disease. And eventually she did. She accepted the invitation and brought sisters with her, and they dedicated themselves, to the love of the people. And, and it's interesting because I've been to the island. I have prayed at the altar of St. Damien, in the little chapel that's there. And I've just been re-invited to visit next year, if God willing. And to me, it just speaks of sacrificial love. And it speaks of someone just willing to go where most people would not go, and to love in a way that people would not think they're capable of doing. Yeah. That to me is what the blesseds, the venerables, the servants of God, the saints, but the people in general that I meet, that every day are sacrificing. And this is something beautiful about our Catholic faith, which we started with a sense of patriotism, piety, devotion, virtue. Yeah. And when we truly hear, and Pope Leo XIV has been talking about this himself, and talking about what love does and what love demands. And he's been using a phrase that we're all familiar with, civilization of love. But how do you build a civilization of love? It's built on those who are willing to love. Yeah. And not love, selfishly, but love other. Right? And so that requires sacrifice. And so all the people we have been mentioning here, and not mentioning the thousands of religious men and women who came to this nation, still come to this nation from Africa, India, Asia, Latin America. Sadly, Europe is struggling just like the United States. But, we're being, even Ireland, the great giver to the world of some of the most great saints of the missionaries of evangelization, herself needs to be re-evangelized. right? So our nation needs that now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I foresee, my prayer is going forward, praying to the Holy Spirit, to enkindle in us this missionary zeal again, to invigorate the heart of the church to see herself as mission, which is what she is by her nature, is on mission to go out and proclaim, to baptize, all right, to bring others into the faith. We should not settle, for the things that we see in front of us, but to engage. It's not imposed. We're not obviously, but to invite. But we witness it.
So this was going to Sister Blandina, who some people know about. She's a little bit more well known. She spent time in Trinidad, Colorado, I believe, back when it was like the Wild West. And there was one point where she was informed that one of the outlaws in the gang of Billy the Kid, who apparently was not the famous Billy the Kid, it was a different Billy the Kid that was around the same time, or at least a different Billy outlaw, but it's often said Billy the Kid. One of his gang members had been shot and was like dying, and there was like 3 or 4 doctors that were like, we're not touching it. Like, we're not going to go anywhere near him. The gang's too dangerous. And she showed up, and she did not preach at him. She took care of him as a nurse. And because she did that, he eventually kind of started asking her, like, can God forgive my sins and things like that. And he said, if you would come in here preaching God, I would have sent you away so that I could die in peace. But because she showed up and was kind of focused first on, how can I serve him? What does he need from me? How do I give him the care that he needs?
Amen.
It was able to kind of unlock that door where he trusted her more and was able to open up about it. So I think it's also just a beautiful model of, we don't necessarily need to go in and win every argument right at the outset, but you're showing up. It made me think of what you and I talked about with having a pro-life parish and showing up for people's needs, providing food, providing shelter, really kind of finding common ground by meeting those needs first is a good way to be able to build those relationships and bring people to the faith.
Which I think that beautiful story makes me think of how so many of our religious men and women came to this nation from its very early settlements to the current moment, doing exactly what you just articulated so beautifully. They come with a mission. They come with a purpose. They know what they believe. Yeah. Mother Teresa did not have to be convinced about what she believed. She believed, but she loved greatly. And as a result, she loved all. She loved each person she came across, and she witnessed the transformative power of love that originates in God himself, the author of love. And I see that still being played out today, and I believe that many people serving in houses of Congress are doing the same thing. They know they're going oftentimes into the belly of the beast, but they bring a very different framework, a very different vision. And that vision is contagious. And in knowing prudently and how to navigate those waters. That's why, to me, we're still on mission. This nation has not been fully converted. This nation has not fully accepted Jesus Christ, right? This nation still has much territory to be evangelized, catechized, formed. There are so many souls that still do not know Christ in his fullness. So there's much here.
Well, and as amazing as the stories of all these missionaries are as well, there's also I think it's the Mother Teresa quote of, like, if you want to be a missionary, go home and love your family. Of that attitude of, we can be missionaries in our own communities, in our own families. There's, like you said, so many people and we are mission territory right now. Like, America is mission territory in some ways. You don't need to go to far off lands or go to Hawaii to the leper colony to evangelize, but being able to do it in your own home your own community is kind of our call right now in some ways.
And it doesn't, Colleen, and I know we're getting toward the end of our time, but that fits within the model of the founding fathers in many ways. They believed, and I quote back to Ronald Reagan, this light on a hill. I really believed, that this is something where there is something here very good that we need to foster. We need to help grow. And as Catholics, the way that we do this is by living the gospel, living the church's teaching, where we are in every conversation, to every situation we are in. We do not compromise our principles. We stand firmly in them, and we're willing to be patient as we navigate those waters, but never relinquishing, never diminishing, but always standing firm, always standing in the light, always standing in that freedom that comes from the gospel, and realizing there's nothing that anyone can do and that the government doesn't give me my freedom. It doesn't give me anything other than the opportunities through its republic and its law where I can blossom and grow. And that to me is something beautiful that this nation has that many nations do not have. And so there is a great treasure here that's very fragile. Freedom is fragile. The way that we have in our republic and the way we understand liberty, it's very fragile. And right now it's dancing on the edge of a knife. It's very concerning. But this is where Catholics come in. This is where, again, what is freedom? What is conscience? What is truth? Who is man? Who is woman? What is the family? These are things that we bring to the conversation. And I just want to commend the many men and women who stand in those moments, in that breach daily, preaching, teaching, loving, caring, witnessing the gospel, because that's what's transforming this world. When you think of, the whether they be laity, whether they be consecrated men or women, priest, holding the hand of someone dying, wiping their brow, being present to someone who's wounded and in need. As Pope Benedict would say to the gospel of the Good Samaritan, who's the person in need? Just that, the person in need. And as long as I'm not asked to do something that's completely in opposition to my faith and moral position, that need is going to be met. And that's what the church has done with great golden stars, charity, its great social arm. I mean, when you think of the nation, this is, again, we could sit here and brag for days and hours, but, this nation would, and I know I'm being, quite verbose in this, but the idea is it's this nation would not be what it is without the Catholic faith. Then, today, the contribution of the church in this wonderful nation is owed a tremendous gratitude. Because without her, we would not see much of the institutions where they are today.
No, that's so true. Before we wrap up the episode, Father, is there any last figures that either stand out to you that you want people to read more about? Is there just like one person that we either haven't mentioned that you want to mention, or out of the people that we've mentioned that you're just like, this person's really cool, encourage people to learn
the way
more about?
What I would do, because I do have several names, but what I would suggest, and I'm thinking of, of Silos, I'm thinking of Fulton Sheen. Many people look at him on TV, but they don't really know what Fulton Sheen may or may not have been teaching, how he taught, what was he engaged in. I would say look in the local community. The local church in many parts of our nation have servants of God, venerables, blesseds, and they're growing. And I imagine many of our own Catholics don't know that. They might know some of the more recent ones, St. John Paul II Parish. They might know, they might know of Mother Cabrini. They might know of Drexel. They might know Elizabeth Ann Seton because they see the names, but they may not know who they are. And, and they might not know the reason. So look them up. There are, you mentioned, Dutton. In Hawaii, I know him only because of being there, in Hawaii on several occasions on mission and being on the island of Molokai, knowing his history. So, and I know his cause. And so I'm familiar, but many people are not familiar. So in New Orleans, when people think about Ursuline Academy, they think about Xavier, when they think about Mother Cabrini, when they think of Silos, when they think of, who are these people, right? That's what I would encourage. And I think people on the East Coast are a little more privileged. They're going to hear more names, all right? But there are several, on the West Coast.
Well, you have Father DeSmet. I don't think he was a saint. No.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think he was a saint, but he was a missionary out to the Montana area. It was called the Friend of Sitting Bull.
That's right.
You have Father Junipero Serra. You have a number of different, again, I guess this isn't saints, but these are just missionaries who are in that area.
I'm thinking of Father Gilbolt, who was a priest during the American Revolution.
Don't know. I've never heard of him.
See, look him up.
Okay.
And you can think of
Father Pierre Gilbo. Is that his name?
That's right. And so, and you think about, there's so many that are there, and again, not because they've been named venerable, servant of God or blessed, but there are many people.
So one thing I was thinking about as I was preparing for this episode is it would be so cool to have a list of like the lesser known ones from each state, because I'm sure that you have either people whose cause for canonization is opened or influential Catholics who were faithful and influenced their community in a way that was like very significant in obviously every state. And it was just something I was like, oh, I wonder if I could start compiling the list of people. So if our audience members know of people from your state or your local community, if you could put them in the comment section, I would absolutely love to just kind of be building to my list of Catholic Americans that I would like to learn more about.
And I would say lastly, this is that the bishops in their recent meeting just opened up the causes for a couple of saints.
Oh.
The lessons. I'm not going to mention them because I want people to go and read.
Okay.
And you can put the link in the show notes, but the idea is, but the bishops just approved so that these can now be advanced to the cause of saints, but also the whole process can begin, because it's a process, obviously. But it's good to know what the bishops are looking at as the body of bishops and what may be a local bishop, because there could be someone that's more localized, but it still affects the universal church. So it's important to know who they are. And there are some great treasures in our local communities.
Well, one I wanted to mention before we wrap up the episode is Rose Hawthorne, who is Nathaniel Hawthorne's daughter. She also was called her Mother Mary Alfonsa. And she's venerable now, I believe. And so her cause is obviously ongoing. And one thing that really struck me about her is she was married and she had an alcoholic husband, and they converted to the faith. And she ended up asking the church for a separation. And so they were given permission to separate. And in that time where they were separated, she went on and was studying nursing and all of that. And she ended up being at his bedside when he died. And then after he died, she went on to become a nun. And it just struck me, I think ever since we did the episodes with Carolyn Clicca-Catino earlier this year, just thinking about how the church can minister to people in marriages that for some reason they're divorced, they're separated for some reason or other. Either they were left or there's a situation like alcoholism and abuse that led to the need for a separation. And just learning more about her and more about her life, I think is just, I would like people to know about her.
Well, and then I'll close, and I'll say this, the last thing, I said it before. So, but when you think about as a nation celebrating our 250th anniversary, right? So when we think about the many men and women who have contributed to the good of this nation, right? So patriots, citizens, right? Well, we also we remember them, and for example, we just remembered the anniversary of D-Day, right? And so we remember these great veterans during the Second World War who just sacrificed so much for our ability to be a nation that is free, right? The liberties that we exercise, right, are because of these people who have sacrificed much. Right. And so we remember them. We don't forget them. That's why we put up statues and monuments. So we remember, we don't forget them. We don't forget the founding fathers. We don't forget, the people who have made this nation what it is. That's what we're celebrating. We're remembering. Right. So, but we're also looking at, as Catholics, living in this nation. Yes, we also remember them. We celebrate them. Some of them are our own family members. I have family members who served in different battles on behalf of this nation, right? And gave up the ultimate sacrifice, right? We all have people in our families that have history in this regard. Also, as a Catholic, I'm proud to be a Catholic in this nation. This is where God has permitted me to blossom and to be and to exist. And so this is not haphazard. So I say this to my fellow Catholics: bloom where you're planted, right? Let this light shine where you are so that God can be glorified and people can come to see the glory of God through the way that we live and the examples we give, and not just through the corporal works of mercy, but through our devotion, through our fidelity, through our commitment in marriage and family life, through the way that we serve the poor, the way that we serve the elderly, the way that we care for the dying, the way that we defend human life. These are all the many ways in which we exercise this great blessing to be of this nation, right? To be a citizen of this great nation, and to be an instrument of change and transformation and contribution to this nation's good. That's what we got to see.
Amen. Well, and obviously now in our 250th year, we also have an American Pope. And one thing that struck me, one thing before we wrap up that I thought was interesting, is both Mother Cabrini and Katharine Drexel were told by Pope Leo XIII to go be missionaries in America. I just thought it was so cool as I was reading that. I'm like, oh, and now we have the first American Pope is Leo XIV. So
what missionaries is he going to send?
Exactly. We'll see.
We'll see.
Well, thank you so much, Father. This was great. This was one of the most fun episodes to prepare for as I was reading all the stories yesterday, just really in awe of the great Catholics that have helped shape and influence America and just their stories. So I hope
Amen.
that our audience enjoyed it as well. And thank you for sharing the ones that you brought as well.
And we have homework, so get to work.
Yes, I'll put a link. I'll put in the description the names of different people that we've mentioned and some of the ones in your list as well. So
Perfect. Awesome.
people can copy and paste it when they go to Google it and not trying to figure out how to spell.
And look up the ones in your own communities.
Yes. Yes. And leave them in the comment section too for us to learn more about. And to all of our audience members, I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I hope that you have a wonderful 4th of July weekend. And yes, please tell me the people in your community, the venerables and the servants of God, because I really do want to learn about them. So please put them in the comment section. And as always, keep on living the culture of life. God bless.